I hope you all had a really great 4th of July. I love the 4th of July. I'm a very patriotic person by nature. I am. And that's been weighing on my mind. I come from a very patriotic lineage, a lineage that cared about the United States of America. They were part of that dream. All of them, on my father's side for sure, was, joined the military and fought. Me as Treva Vale, and that is my legal name. But I was born Verta Vale Richardson. I'm the third daughter of George and Myrna Richardson. My older sister or sibling was Victoria Gale, Norma Lee, and then there was me. Then Julianne, George Jason, and Anita Marie. We were a very musical family. That was the glue, really the only glue, that really held us tight together. George was a good man. I don't want to paint you a picture of him where, he was, just a terrible person. I don't want you to think that. I don't feel that way. Even though my siblings have cast a shadow to say that he didn't love me or care about me. And I think it's more like maybe afraid to be completely honest with me about things. Might be it. But there was favoritism. It was really obvious, my mother, Myrna, was, I don't know. It's hard for me because I'm not the kind of person that just wants to attack people. I never like doing that. I want to tell my story in freedom. But again, right now, this moment, I try to empathize, even though people haven't empathized with me. Of course, they would never dream of doing that, right? But I try to empathize what it must have been like for Myrna to be married to someone like George. Now, George is very talented, right? Very, very intelligent, very talented. And was, a very good-looking man. He was very good-looking, and the ladies loved him. And of course, I've got these pictures of him, and you can look at him, and he was beautiful to the ladies. And so, and he wasn't faithful. He was not a faithful husband to his wife. So that's a given. But as far as his ethics in most situations, as far as his jobs and everything, he was, like I said, he was very intelligent. I don't think that he deliberately was out there, I don't know, maybe he was out there trying to break the law. I don't think so. But all the Richardson boys were a little bit of hellions. They were hellions. And those were the kind of men that women still seem to like, those hellions, right? But there's a limit. There's a limit to these things, right? But again, the Richardsons, they're very, very patriotic people. And they love their family. Even in their hellion behavior, they kind of stuck together. And going to Alabama when I was a kid, I was told that I was born in Chatham, Alabama, in a 10-room hospital, in the same hospital that my grandmother Richardson died, Lucy Margaret Wheat Richardson. And I remember when she was in that hospital, she had diabetes really bad, and she had heart problems. And there was just, there was kind of a spooky, mysterious kind of energy in her home. It was just different, and it could have just been that it was the 1960s and it was in the deep South, and things hadn't really changed that much. There was still segregation, there was still behaviors. My grandmother Lucy, she chewed tobacco and would spit it in Campbell's soup cans. I remember that. She did. I remember her being very sweet, very, very sweet. And she would be in her rocker on the porch. It had a great big front porch, and there were magnolia trees everywhere. And my dad loved his mom and his dad fiercely. I never met my grandfather, Robert Crosby Richardson, but he's talking to me today. He surely did. And I know that people don't like to hear this. They don't want to hear that you can speak to your dead or you can listen to what they say, but I assure you can. There's just no question, okay? I mean, believe what you want to believe. But I had questions. When I was, it's sometimes hard for me to let myself or allow myself to remember things, because there's always some kind of emotion or negativity about it. It's just some kind of grief or sadness in some ways, right? I'm kind of reverting back to Idaho. My mother that raised me, Myrna Esther Wynn, she's from Idaho Falls, and she met George in California on a trip, and but I don't really want to go into that right this minute about her life so much at the moment. But there was something that she told me. My mother was very physically abusive with me. There's no way for me to deny it or hide it, and you can't hide it either. She was. There was probably never a day where I didn't either get spanked, or that she would slap as you walked by, or yank your hair, or just, she was just, seems like she couldn't keep her hands off any of her kids, really. But she was particularly abusive to me. I remember, I don't know how old I was. Maybe I was 12. I don't know. It's personal or something like that, but I had just started my, my period, and she was, actually, telling me how to put, you remember when you used to have to put the little, the little strips on the little belt, in the old days, you couldn't stick them, you had to use a little belt thing. And I guess she was showing me how to do that. But I remember being in the bathroom when she was in the bathtub. We only had one bathroom when we were living in Idaho Falls on Orland Drive. And I think that she was feeling guilty because she knew that our relationship wasn't very good. She knew that there was a wedge between us. There always was, because of the way that she treated me. And, and I was right in the middle. And the middle child often gets lost, right? But but I had this amazing voice, even when I was just a little tiny little girl. I had this it was clear as a bell. And I remember, which is really confusing, because I remember George actually being really proud of me. And he would say, if you put that little girl in a room, you would never know that she was a child, because I had such a crisp, clean voice, a beautiful voice. And maybe that made my siblings, hate me. Probably did, I have a lot of memories that are not, they're not that happy. But I have a purpose for my video today, and it has to do more with the patriotic feelings that George had and that the Richardsons had. Now, George, again, he was the last child, the youngest, of Robert Crosby Richardson and Lucy Margaret Wheat. And they had several children. They had twins that died. I remember going to the cemetery near Citronelle. And it looked more like Pet Cemetery. Actually, it was not very well kept up. It was pretty old cemetery. Of course, I remember my Aunt Verta. They named me Verta. Now, my dad's oldest sibling, the firstborn, was Verta Viola Clark, well, Richardson Clark, right? And they named me after her. And she was very sweet. She'd make those, she'd make collard greens and string beans together. And it was almost like snot. It'd come out, it was so slimy, excuse me. But true, it really was. And I couldn't stand eating okra like that. But anyway, she would make white cornbread in the skillet, in the cast iron skillet. And in the house, the kitchen, it was just a teeny tiny itty bitty kitchen, just like they had in the South. But they had a massive dining room with a great big table and a fireplace. And all of my dad's brothers and their wives, people that had died, that were on the fireplace. It was really kind of spooky. It was it was dark. The kitchen was dark. And when I was a little girl, my grandmother, because of diabetes, she lost one of her legs, and so she had a wooden leg. And no matter how long she had passed away, Aunt Verta kept that wooden leg in the upstairs bathroom. And when you're a little kid, it was really freaky to see Grandma's wooden leg in the bathroom, in the bedroom. Like, she never got rid of it, ever. I think I was around 10 years old when my grandmother Richardson died. But I do remember her. I was playing out in the front yard, and it was really something about it. It was just so alluring being down there, because they'd have to put these crushed oyster shells on the ground. I don't know why that's making me emotional, but they'd put, those crushed oyster shells to keep the dust from flying up. And the earth, you could always tell. I mean, I even think George mentioned that when we were driving down one time, is that you could tell when you got to the South, because it had this really swampy, earthy smell. And it would always give you a sense of excitement because you were almost there. You knew you were getting close. And it was exciting for him because he loved the South. He loved being down there, and that, you know, that was home, and he just loved it. Those smells, that earthy, the kudzu vines, the magnolias. And it was so exciting. And we would all get excited. And we would go down in he had a white Comet. I don't know if you could probably look up. It was a white Comet, and they had those red, you know, those red details, and he smoked Lucky Strikes, which matched his car. It really, they did. The package of the Lucky Strike cigarettes matched his car. And they would put boxes in the back seat, and we didn't have to wear seatbelts back then. Don't know how we all survived, but we did. And so he would make it like it was a bed, and you know, that's where we were. And this is before even Julie was born. It was just Gail, Norma, and I. And we, you know, and so I don't remember Julie at all when the last memory I had of my grandmother, but age-wise, it should have been close, because I know I was older than 6. I thought I was around 10 when she died. But she was, wow, was she Southern? And it was hard to understand really anything that she said, really any of them, because they were close-lipped, and they were real Southern. I mean, it's just that the way they spoke was just really, really such thick accents, right? But it was exciting to see cousins, people from the South. But you know, people would come, the relatives would come when George got there, the baby, right? George played the guitar and he sang, and he was in the music business, and he was an amazing songwriter, amazing songwriter. And like I said, and he loved to play, he loved Johnny Cash. And my mother had a beautiful voice, Myrna. And so they had a thing going where she would always do harmony. And he would perform for people, and really anywhere, no matter where George was, and he'd play music for all of his friends. And that was just who he was. The blood in his bones was playing music. And even though he was a scientist and he worked for the nuclear world, and you know, he was a chemist and all that. And he was hired, you know, up in Idaho. He didn't get his degree, but he was really, really smart. And he was, you know, was very good at what he did. And, you know, and remembering the stories, you know, breaking his legs. He broke both of his legs in a car accident. And you know, something around my birth, I don't know how it all happened. I mean, I'm trying to dig back to pictures and memories to try to remember everything. But my siblings, because of an inheritance, wanted to make me think that George didn't love me, or that Myrna didn't love me. Now, I know that's not true. There was some really difficult moments I had with George, because, you know, before I even graduated from high school, I was traveling with a band, and that was just really the start of everything. And high school really wasn't that important to me at that time. I mean, I was young, and I was, you know, doing what I'm really good at, even when I was that young, you know. And I was already writing music. I was writing a lot of music back then when I was, you know, 16 years old. Some, you know, great songs, you know. I was more into rock and roll than I was into country music, but I had that, you know, exposure to country music very much so in my home. You know, and I liked, you know, that kind of music as well. But anyway, I really do have a point to make. And like I said, it's really hard because, you know, to have your siblings vilify you like this and to try to completely erase you out of your family. I got these downloads, some information. When I was young, I picked up that my grandfather, Robert Crosby Richardson, also had the last name of Bowling. You know, and I was told that he was adopted, which was confusing because usually when you think of someone being adopted, you think that they're not related to you at all, but or related to his mom and dad at all. But in my grandfather's case, I learned today, because I didn't have all the information. And it's easy to make assumptions that when somebody is adopted, that they have no bloodline with their parents or their family, right? But I learned that that's not true. That that my great-grandfather, and you guys can check the facts and let me know if I'm right or wrong, but this is what I picked up on. I'm not sure. Now we're talking about John Jefferson Richardson. And we're talking about the 1800s. And that he was, I don't know that much about him. I only know a little bit that I've looked for, you know, on Family Search and Ancestry.com, but it came to me that what likely happened, which what they told me, was that John Jefferson Richardson is the biological father of Robert Crosby. And Bowling may have been the name of his mother that he was not married to. So I'm wondering, and then, you know, and for something along those lines. Robert Crosby, I think he was, because of the situation, and in the early 1800s, if you were born or created out of wedlock, wow, that would be really horrific shame, especially on somebody that might have been a politician or royalty of some sort. Maybe, you know, because right then, you know, it's still early in the country's age. It's, you know, 100 years, I mean, not even 100, maybe not even 100 years old, 1776, no, likely not even 100 years old, right? So the country's like just forming, right? And so, and of course, I'm sure that John Jefferson had slaves, right? And so I'm trying to piece it all together, but from what I intuited, what happened to me is likely what happened to Robert Crosby. Now, you can check and let me know how close I am and what it is I think I'm picking up. I think that there was maybe arguments about, you know, inheritances even back then, because, you know, here he is, a blood ancestor with someone, likely another woman, and yet, you know, John Jefferson had children with the woman he was married to also. So I'm wondering if that's where the arguing started, where the fighting started, somewhere along those lines. And so, and I'm not really sure. Now, early on, somebody told me that George wasn't my dad, and that would explain a lot. But then again, you know, I know what my father was like. He, you know, my dad, you know, he liked the ladies, okay? So, you know, I imagined early on that he was with another woman. Okay, fast forward back to Idaho Falls. My mother, I'm in the bathroom, my mother is taking a bath. And she tells me, and this might have been around 13, you know, we were still in Idaho, so it had to be like 12, 13. Because they said they moved us up from Alabama when I was around 3 years old, 2, 3 years old. I think I was 2. Pretty sure. Something like that. Anyway, Myrna is telling me, not really apologizing for the way she treats me. She wasn't saying like, you know, I've been rough on you, and I'm sorry about it. She told me that when she was pregnant with me, that my father, George, was in love with another woman. So their marriage, you know, like I said, he was playing music, he was doing, you know, and my mom had Gail and Norma, so she went by Gail when we were growing up, and Norma, and she said that when she was pregnant with me, that she had gone, that she knew who the woman was, and that she had gone and caught them together, I guess. And she told me that she caught them, and that the woman had said, you know, was telling her how much she loved him, that she loved him, and that she couldn't live without him. And Myrna said to her, she said, well, you better go take a cold shower. And she told George that if you stay in this situation, you will never see your children again, ever. That she would take Norma and Gail and Norma, and that he would never see his kids again. So George, of course, he loved his kids, you know, and so I guess the affair ended. Now I've thought about this, and I thought, you know, there's a couple of different, you know, maybe I should have put it together. Maybe even the spirits are kind of hesitating a little bit. But early on, like over a year ago, I was told that Myrna was not my mother. And then I was told that George wasn't my dad, that he's my uncle. So that would lead me to believe that one of his brothers would be my father. And so, and as I thought about all of them, you know, and how they managed to keep this huge secret, there was a particular time when I was a little older that I had spent a day with my Uncle J.K. It was just out of the blue. I was there and he asked me if I wanted to go for a ride with him. So I did. And he was funny, really sweet. He's taller than George. I really liked him a lot. I liked him a lot. So I went with him and he took me over to where he was living. And he showed me his artwork, and he was really a gifted artist. He was very talented artistically. But I remember having a really nice time with him. He wasn't he was talkative, but he wasn't super talkative. But he was very charismatic, had a really beautiful smile. A very handsome guy too. He was very handsome as well. And so when somebody was telling me that my uncle was my dad, if it was going to be somebody other than George, I would have picked JK. But I don't know. But I did also sense too that there was someone in the family, a cousin or somebody in the family, that had me very young, and that they gave me to George and Myrna. So I'm still a Richardson, but I'm not sure who the actual mother was. And if it was an uncle, how would the uncle hook up with any of these aunts or people? I mean, I don't really know how Myrna's family got involved in all of this, you know, meddlesome stuff. But I do get the impression, well, I know for a fact that I am absolutely a Richardson. You know, and even when I haven't spoken to my siblings for a long time. It's been over a year now, because they were pulling some funny business, right? And I knew that I was being stalked by Star Maker, and they were shadow banning me on YouTube, trying to, you know, my family wasn't supportive of my singing. And I'm sorry, you know, if you have a talent, there isn't an age limit, okay, by the way. And so, but they felt like it was their personal obligation to block me, stop me, keep me from being myself and sharing my talents. You know, and it wasn't because, and maybe it's because I like rock music, right? And they were into more Christian or country. And I like rock music, or like, you know, more of the pop rock thing, right? But I think that the overall thing is that because I'm good at what I do, very good at what I do, and I'm experienced, and I'm saying professionally, that it was just like really bothering them, because when we were all kids, we would sing together as a family. That was kind of George and Myrna's thing. That was the glue that kept us together. If we were together as a family, we would always sing together. And, you know, and so in their minds, I guess they had it to where I wasn't allowed, literally, and this is just insane, that I somehow wasn't allowed to sing, that somehow they owned my voice. They owned me. Why would that be? Which is another thing, right? I couldn't get away from their grubby little mitts. No, you cannot do anything without us, you know? Why would that be? I mean, they can go paint and sing. I'm not going to stop them. But there was a bigger reason involved here. And that's where it came in with the inheritance that my dad, George, before he died, and I remember, when he was going through chemo, that when I looked at him, he would go like, he wouldn't really look at me. He'd be like, he would blink and not really look me straight in the eye. I didn't understand that. But I noticed it. It's like that, you know? And I imagine in all that paperwork that he had in that apartment in the back of the house on Pine Log Road. We lived at 1517 Pine Log Road in Aiken. And he had reel-to-reels of the music that he wrote and documents. And I'm sure that my mom and I'm sure that they wanted to keep it a secret, that they were jealous for whatever reason, because whoever my dad hooked up with that made me, you know, maybe that's where the problem lies here somewhere. But my battery is getting low. So I'm gonna go recharge, but I think I'm onto something. But there's some music I wanted to share with you, but I'll come back as soon as I charge again and tell you more. Thanks for stopping by and listening to me. I'm telling you what I know and what I intuit and what I feel like happened to Robert Crosby Richardson, which is likely what happened to me. Pretty close. If you could let me know. Those historians that know. Thank you for listening, for stopping by. I'll be back soon.